Hello everyone, my name is Leon Yushin, and today we'll have an introduction to index and match. Now, the index match formula is the combination of two functions in Excel, index and match. Combined, the two formulas can look up and return the value of a cell in a table based on vertical and horizontal criteria. It's generally considered a much more sophisticated replacement of the much used vlookup function. Now, with vlookup, most people will input a specific static number to indicate which column they want to return from. But when you use index and match, the formula allows you to manually choose which column you want to pull from. Essentially, you have more control over the type of data you want to select using index match. What is indexing match? So let's break it down into two parts. The index function allows you to either look in a column of data and return a value, or look in a row of data and return that value. So think of it as the data that you consider most important and want to find. There are two different versions of the index function, the array form and the reference form, but today specifically we'll be focusing on the array form. The match function allows you to find the position of values in a list either in a column or row of data. The match function can either look in a column of data and return the row of number of values, or vice versa, as we discussed before. So think of it as a tool you'll use to find your most important data. So why are they so important? The index match function is one of Excel's most powerful features, the older brother of the much used vlookup. But unlike vlookup, it can be used on rows, columns, or both at the same time. Think of it as the game Bingo, in which there are 5 main advantages it has over vlookup. Number 1, you don't have to count. With index match, there is no more worrying about counting to figure out which column you need to pull from. You just select your lookup column and results column, and you're done. Number 2, you can safely insert columns. With vlookup, if you insert a column in between the start of your table and the column you want to reference, your formula will break. But in index match, on the other hand, it safely updates no matter where you insert your columns. Number 3, you can look up backwards. vlookup only allows you to look up from columns that are in front of your starting point. But with index match, you can pull from any column you want. Number 4, in this case, it is separate formulas. Now, you don't need to remember separate formulas for vlookup because it's all given under index match. And number 5, which is a little bit more complex functionality, index match doesn't stop with the above. You can also use index match to look up across both rows and columns, or use index match with multiple criteria. Again, unlike vlookup. So how are an index and match applied to finance and accounting? Index and match are often used in financial modeling and other types of financial analysis to make models more dynamic and incorporate multiple scenarios. So here's an example. On the right shows a set of percentages. By creating 2 categories on each vertical and horizontal corner based on calendar dates and exit date IRR, we're able to find specific product information more effectively, which will be shown on the box that says near answer or underneath the yellow box that says preferred. Another example includes looking up the current price of a stock in a large portfolio spreadsheet only by its symbol. Because it has a lot of information, index and match can be used to spot specific information more effectively, which will be an example we'll be using today. So today, we'll be using an example specifically to Starbucks and how it's used to find specific information based on its different sizes and flavors. Now, if you'll notice, this data represents the different types of prices on 2 types of data, which we just talked about. The type of drink, such as cafe latte, cappuccino, caramel macchiato, cafe mocha, white chocolate mocha, and the size of the drink, which by Starbucks measurements are tall, which is small, grande, which is medium, and venti, which is large. Now, with this information, we'll be discussing what an index, not an index match, is, and how it applies and why we need a match formula to follow with. So this should be an imperfect model for us to learn from. Now, if I click on this section over here, which is the first formula, you'll see the following formula translated at the very top index. This formula will result in the number price 395, which you can see over here. But if you look at the top left, you'll see it's a representative Cafe Mocha Grande price. Now the question is, how do we get this and what does it provide? So let's break it down with a sample example below, right over here. So let's begin. Let's type down the type of drink we're looking for in the first place. So in this case, because it asks, what is the price of a Cafe Mocha? Let's just type Cafe Mocha, and let's go with a grande price. There we go. Then let's press the equal sign on the right to begin our function. So we write in equal sign, and then we begin writing index, the word index, before we click on the tab button. By pressing tab, it autofills in the formula while starting a parentheses. The parentheses allows for us to specify the next step. Now, if you look below, it shows right here. If you look below, it shows how we have two options, and we're only going to just worry about the first option, which are these three arguments. Number one, array, then row number, and then the column number. The array is the information we're trying to pull. And the row number is the vertical list characteristic, and the column is the horizontal, another characteristic in this case. So based on this picture, it's another way to describe it. Array answers the question, where? Now, to create this formula, you don't need to press either option. Excel will figure it out for you, all while applying these three arguments. Now, let's say we wanted a return price for a Cafe Mocha from our table. We're now just going to specify the array, in this case, which is a range of values we want to return a single sales value from. So let's highlight it. This is the information we're trying to find out, the price, remember? There we go. Now, it's a good habit to anchor this or make it an absolute reference. And the way we do this is by, let's just kind of delete that real quick and then highlight this again. And the way you want to do this is by adding dollar signs. So what we would do is we add dollar signs to the column and the array. There we go. And this goes to both sections, the beginning to the very end. Now, an absolute reference in Excel refers to a reference that is quote unquote locked, so that rows and columns won't change when they're copied. So unlike a relative reference, an absolute reference refers to an actual fixed location on a worksheet. Now, to create an absolute reference in Excel, add a dollar sign like we just showed you before the row and the column. So let's do an example. Let's use a random sheet and assume we're trying to add tall, grande, and venti prices. So if you click at the very top index, we'll see that we're specifying on the column D, E, F on row 22. So we're adding 295, 375, and 415 together by using this formula, and then we just press enter. So what do we do if we want to find the same formula, but to the rows below? It's very simple. You just click on this function and you stretch it, just like this. And then boom, you have your answer. So let's mix it up a little bit. Let's say if we want to add all these prices, we want to add the tall, the grande, and venti all together before we multiply it by an interest rate of 3%. And the way you do this is just by an equal sign, group it under parentheses before you multiply it by the interest rate, which is under K21. Basic algebra. You click enter, and now we want to find the same formula to the ones below us. So let's see what happens when we stretch it. So if you notice, it is 0. So the question is, why does it do that? So if we click under 0 over here, we look at the very top, although it went one row like we wanted to, it did the same for the interest rates, which is something we don't want. Because when it goes one below under an empty space, it counts it as a 0, and that's why the rest of these are 0. So let's look at this next section. In this case, it is tall plus grande plus venti prices times this same section, K21, but it has an absolute reference, which adds a dollar sign to both the column and 21. So let's see what happens once we stretch this down to the rest of the columns. It works. So this just kind of shows how important absolute references are in all situations, and especially to index and match when we want our formulas to stay exactly where they are. So similarly, we apply all the prices, all the possible values that we want to return. Our next two duties are to signify the two characteristics to find a specific array or price. So let's begin by writing our index again before clicking tab. And we're going to begin by specifying the array and turn it into absolute reference. So notice how I did that over here. Now we're going to begin by putting a comma. The comma allows the next function to be inputted. For our row number for right now, we're just going to be typing the manually, which would be the fourth row, beginning with a cafe mocha. So we click 4. But notice how we're not putting in the fifth row, even though that would technically make sense. So if you look over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, that would be caramel macchiato. So why is that? And the answer is because the list only begins when the array is underlined. So because we begin our array on list 22 and we stretch it down to 26, this is where the list begins. So it starts 1, 2, 3, 4 on cafe mocha. There we go. And then what we're going to do on the following, and that's because, again, our array begins with the cafe latte does. Next, we're going to type another comma before inputting the column number. There you go. The column number is a horizontal, and like the row, it begins where the array does. So let's begin where we're looking for grande size, right over here. So because we're looking for grande, and we start a list from over here, we click 1, 2 on the grande. So we click 2. Now all we have to do at this point is close it out like this and see what happens when we click enter. And then boom, here you have it, $3.95. So let's check it out. Cafe mocha, grande, $3.95. Perfect. That's what we got our example. But this is an example of just an index. But notice how it only applies for one type of coffee and size. It's not really, convenient to find other types of prices without manually type it into a formula. So that brings us to our next point, the match to our index. Let's look at the next slide. There we go. Now, no worries. Before we begin, I would like to mention this may seem very overwhelming, but we're only going to be focusing on two characteristics, just the name and the employee ID. Now, another thing to mention would be to show how the cells are interconnected to one another. So for example, Jackson Lush, he only has one employee ID, one region, one department, 1 month, 1 year, 1 sales, and 1 discounts. There we go. And this goes essentially for every person here included. So you shouldn't be too worried about what we're going to be working here today. Now, we'll once again be writing an index function, but we'll be adding 3 new parts. Number 1 is specifying the row and column with a match function. Secondly, we'll be creating a function list. And lastly, the precision rate of our answers. So let's look at the question highlighted in green. What is Kiara Larissa's employee ID? So if we're looking at the name section, notice how it says right over here, it says Jackson Lush, and then ID number is 10001, which is not what we're looking for. So let's change the name, and what you can do is click on this, and then you click Kiara Larissa, and then boom. If you look at the right cell, the ID changes to Kiara's, which is 10005. Let's learn how do we do this by pulling the information. Now, before we can create a formula, we need to provide name options or characteristics for us to choose from in order to influence our array. So we'll begin by clicking on area, preferably under the section that says name, and click on data. There we go. And before we find the data validation button. Now, once we click on that, an icon will appear asking for us to develop a certain criteria for us to base it off. Since we want the user to have a list of names, we click under allow over here. And then because we're looking for a list of names, we click on list. Now, once we have the names, click under sources to underline the actual list names. So we're going to begin all the way here. There we go. And you'll even notice how the Excel automatically recommends an absolute value, or absolute reference in this case. And there you go. We have our list. We click OK. Now, in order to make this list useful, we need to connect it to our formula. So let's just click on a random name in order to apply this to be more useful. There we go. My computer's a little bit heating up, so excuse the noise a little bit. Now, like the previous sheet, let's begin by typing the equal sign. Then the word index before tapping the tab button. There we go. Now, since we're trying to return the ID number based on the people named, we'll be hiding column A in this section. Column A. Then we'll proceed over here and make sure you tab it. There you go. There are different types of tabbing it, ensuring that there's an absolute reference. Another way to do it is by quickly pressing F4 on Windows, or in this case, I use Command T on my MacBook. And there we go. Bam, your beginning index. You've got it right over here. So there we go. And what we're going to do next is comma it. We'll begin our match function finally. So there we go. And make sure everything's capitalized, but usually it does it for you. There we go. We click on tab. There we go. Now here's what the interesting parts gets. In order to connect our cell name list on the left, we need to specify the exact cell location, which in this case is under column A, row 32. So we can just click on A32, and as you can see, it automatically highlights it for you if you click on that. And then you are going to proceed to comma it and create an absolute reference range for the name supported. Let's do that. We click comma, and we support all the names once again. In this case, I place Command T. Now, our last step is to decide how accurate we'd like our answer to be. Now, out of 3 options, before we tab it right over here, we're going to press 0 since we'd like our answer to be exact. Or based on this picture over here, it shows the different types of situations. In this case, most people use 0 to make it exact, but in other instances, it would be useful to use a 0 or not 0, 1 or a -1. And you can pause the video and read this function over here to see in what instances that would be more useful. But in this case, we just press 0. And that's it. So we're going to close this match function, and then we have to press parentheses again to close the index function. So we're going to click on enter, and there you have it. So like again, the question says, what is Chiara Larissa's employee ID? We're going to test it out by clicking the name section, Chiara Larissa, and if you can tell, the ID changed alongside with it. So this shows kind of a very simple way of using index and match. Now our last example we're going to use is to show what happens if we want to use multiple versions of our index match function by adding 2 match functions in this case. And we're not going to work there, we're just going to describe it. So in this case, we have Cafe Mocha, which is our item list, and we created by clicking data and creating a sheet list underneath it. And in this case, after we underline our array by highlighting this information, we create our first match function by first selecting the list, which is in this case is C14. And it's important that when you follow this section, it supports the information that follows along with it. In this case, you want to highlight the different selections of coffee drinks. So we can tell we're underlining this section. And all you have to do next is, after you close it with a 0, is create another match function. In this case, you click focus on the size, which is D14, before you underline tall, grande, and venti. And then again with another 0, and then close this entire function. So let's see what happens. Let's say we want to look for a white chocolate mocha. There we go. And we want the size grande. And there you go. You have our price has changed alongside to exact specifications that we wanted, just like bingo. So this gives a good solid introduction to index match functions. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.